Assalamu alaikum and welcome to this edition of BookBytes on Salam Media. I'm very pleased to have just completed the current read for today's interview, An Island by South African author Karen Jennings, who is now based in Brazil. And An Island was recently longlisted for the 20 Booker Prize, so it's very exciting to
Breaking stereotypes, moving boundaries, joining hands. Salam Media. Humanity sets the agenda.
Dad, well, I've been chatting with an investment broker today and...
Broker? Did the broker tell you that our economy is a mess? There's bushfires in Australia, America wanted World War III, and now the coronavirus is traveling around the world.
Well, I also thought about purchasing some crypto.
Crypto? What's that, like another pyramid scheme? I don't trust what I can't see.
There's an apartment in Belito.
So all your family will be asking to stay there for free. And what if the government takes it away, eh?
Dad, I don't think it works like that.
I'll tell you what works. Gold. At your age, I invested in gold coins and it paid for your university fees and your wedding. No contracts, no agreements. Your investment is in your hands and you own it. With a 70% growth in only 5 years, do you still doubt gold investment? Contact RJ Coin today, 031 202 4701, or visit them at 151 Stephen Lamini Road in Musgrave, Durban. Randery Jewelers Gold Coin Exchange, your passport to gold investment.
Breaking stereotypes, moving boundaries, joining hands. Salam Media. Humanity sets the agenda.
And welcome to this edition of BookBytes. I'll be speaking to Karen Jennings, the South African author of An Island, which was recently longlisted for the 2021 Booker Prize. I've had an absolute pleasure reading through this book, a small book, but by no means without offering its fair share of great thematic considerations. Karen, welcome to the show this evening.
Hi. Hello, thank you very much for having me. I'm very pleased to be here.
You're out in Brazil, so we're chatting to you where it's mid-afternoon and you've been away for a while, but obviously a lot of inspiration to write out there. Tell us about the process, your writing process, and the lead up to writing this particular novel.
Okay, well, firstly, let me say that I'm not permanently based in Brazil. My husband is Brazilian and we came here for a few years for him to work. So the plan is very much to move back to South Africa as soon as possible. And then with regard to the novel, what had happened was I had been researching and writing a novel about the set in 1886 about the mining industry in South Africa. And so I was very fortunate to have an opportunity to go to a writer's residency in Denmark, and I was working on that. And I finished a first draft of that novel while I was there. And I thought, oh, what will I do next? And then I went to have a nap. And while I was having a nap, I suddenly had this vision of an old Black African man on an island, and just that he has this lighthouse on this island and that he was there all alone. And I got the sense that he didn't want anyone else on the island. And at the time, there was a lot in the news about the Syrian refugee crisis. And equally, there was a great African refugee crisis where African refugees were drowning, dying, being chased away from Europe regularly. But no one was making a fuss about that. And no one was thinking about it in the same way that they were about the Syrian refugees. And so that made me think about what is it in Africa that makes us xenophobic towards our own, not only within Europe, but within Africa, that xenophobia.
I found it very interesting how how you take on these themes of xenophobia, of this consideration of this place of home, of the anxiety that your protagonist experiences in laying claim to the island, and in some way, he has this human sense of taking care of this person who's washed up on the island, but then he starts to think about his own survival in relation to another person being on the island, and I find those reflections so interesting. Firstly, I want to say congratulations because you're a South African author, so it's a double celebration for us that that this book was longlisted for the Booker Prize, and we're rooting for you. But at the same time, the kind of political commentary that comes through. Speak to us also about how it is that you can condense all of this into the considerations for a novel that actually works its way out in 4 days.
Well, I will say that it was incredibly difficult. It was not a challenge that came to me with any sort of ease. It was because I felt that the themes were so important, so very meaningful to all of us that live on the African continent. No matter what our race, what our nation. So I knew that it had to be treated with great nuance and respect. Um, and bearing in mind that I am white, you can't get away from the fact that I'm white, and the dreadful colonial history that affected so many nations in Africa. So I was very worried about appropriation, about speaking on behalf of people, but it was very important to me as a South African to try and understand the history of Africa, of South Africa and try and understand where we're coming from and where we're going to, and try and understand my place in all of that. And I didn't want to shy away from it. I wanted to embrace it, but with great care. And so, because I knew that the themes that were interesting to me were so immense, I decided that for me, the best way to do it, I didn't believe that I would be able to do it justice, do those themes justice, if I tried to do a massive book with hundreds of different characters and nations and all of that. So I thought that the best way to go about it would be to simplify it, in a sense, to make an allegory of it, and to take the action and apply it to one man, or sort of two men, in a very isolated place in a non-specific time with not any sort of specific nation represented. Because I wanted to deal with things as simply, as subtly as I could, but still give them their due attention. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but it was the best way that I saw of trying to deal with such very, very complicated issues.
I think that's the power of this book and the power of your story is being able to bring it in a way. I can't use the word condensed because there's nothing condensed about your story, but to be able to focus so specifically on this limited time period and this amount of people and the range of emotions and reflections that I, sort of experienced through them and by them. Also, the discourse of my land and ownership and
Yeah.
dispossession, that comes through very strongly in the book, while being a fictional novel that can be very personal to the reader as well. I found that as well, that you can personalize this to your own experience of belonging, a sense of home, and all of that as well. Um, I find your juxtapositions interesting also of past and present within this 4-day period. And he's thinking back to life, to being somebody who was part of the struggle, so to speak. And I started thinking also in terms of South Africa in particular, and this idea of, in many ways, the disillusionment of this rainbow future that
Yes.
everyone had envisaged, and the ramifications of that based on what we've experienced in the country in the past few weeks as well. I mean, you wrote this book this book was published last year, but it seems prophetic in some ways. I don't know if anyone has actually brought that question up to you in recent times after what we experienced in South Africa, the sort of
No,
raging unrest.
they haven't. And what's sad is that when I was writing the novel, we have a history of violence in South Africa. There's no denying it. It's a dreadful history of violence, and we have a continuing history of violence for multiple complex reasons. There's the failure of democracy, the failure of the government, the failure, all these promises to people, to the poor, that things are going to change, that they are going to have water, have toilets, and that's not forthcoming. And so there, the unrest that there was recently seen in South Africa, which was dreadful on so many levels, it's unfortunately not anything new, but it is that kind of unrest that I want to try and understand. What is it that drives people to violent acts? To what history? What is the legacy of the past that forces them in the present to become so desperate that they will set buildings alight, loot shops, kill people, attack people? And that's really what I want to try and understand.
I really see the connection also in this politics of fear, the manipulation of legitimate fear, and lack of resource unfortunately, for political gains. In the case of the novel, seen as perhaps less outwardly political, but the same kind of sentiment, of if I don't have enough, I will not survive. And so the us versus them is a strong element in creating that space for survival. Whether it's with, the metaphor you use with the chickens and this man, your protagonist, and this refugee that washes up on the shore. I also want to ask you about, in a way, the rehabilitation of prisoners coming back into society as Samuel does. And in some ways, it's like he's happy to be away on the island. And the refugee who is washed up on the shore because he's seeking safety as well. There is comment about that. I don't know if it's deliberate. It does feel that way. Perhaps you want to comment on some of that about reintegrating into society, of people who are banished or forcefully migrated versus somebody who comes out of the prison system.
Well, that's another incredibly complex issue. I remember as an 18-year-old thinking about what it must be like to be in prison, which for many people is becomes their home. It become their fellow prisoners become their family. There's an immense problem with gangs in our South African prisons, where people who previously have not felt like they belong anywhere, like they have a sense of purpose, they're taken up in the gang, in the prison. They feel like they have a purpose, like they belong to something. And then to be released from prison, it's almost like a punishment then to come out into the world where people will judge you because you've been in prison and you have the marks of that, like in tattoos and in on your permanent record. And then how do you then try to integrate yourself and make a home for yourself on the outside where people will not accept you or don't want to accept you. And I think that there's quite a similarity there for refugees who are fleeing their home, somewhere where they felt they belonged. Then they're fleeing, trying to come make a new life, but they have the marks of the refugee on them, those hallmarks that we all see. Oh, you have this skin color or these features, and you're different, and you speak a different language. How does that person then try to make a home for themselves when no one around them is willing to allow them to do that?
And so, in many ways, this story is really about the survival of the dispossessed. And one wonders how it is that Samuel has, which of them actually comes up to be the winner in this survival story, so to speak, and why.
Yeah.
Is it legitimate fear? Is it anxiety born of whatever reasons? A lifetime of anxiety that informs decisions in this book as well. Tell us about some of your earlier writing, and how it's what's your writing motivated by, informed by. I haven't read any of your early works, but I'd love to hear some of. You've got
Sure.
Finding Silk, Travels with My Father, and Upturned Earth, Away from the Dead, and a poetry volume called Space Inhabited by Echoes. I'd love to hear about some of those as well.
Right. Well, my first novel, Finding Soutpack, is set on the west coast of South Africa, and it's about a small village, and it's divided by, socioeconomic factors, but also partly by race. And so it's about, in part, about the mayor, who's a colored man, trying to make this town famous or become a tourist attraction, and his attempts to do that. But really, it's also about the poor, how they are forgotten and left behind by the government, by the people in power. It's about corruption and lying, and how that affects the everyday ordinary person. And that's really what I am interested in exploring, is how the past and also the decisions and actions that we see in the present, how that influences the way that people see themselves, how they behave, and how they connect with the land and with those around them. And that's something else that I also explored in Upturned Earth, which is the historical mining novel set in 1886, which is set in what was then called Springbokfontein, which is now Springbok in Namaqualand. And that's about the first commercial copper mining enterprise, so the first commercial mining in South Africa prior to the gold rush and the diamonds and all of that. And what we see there again is the exploitation of the poor. We see decisions and corruption that is all about getting an elite few ahead in life, making them money. But what are the consequences for the poor? And it's a comment also on Marikana, which we just had the anniversary of Marikana a few days ago, where we had the terrible massacre in 2012 of protesting innocent people, protesting nonviolent people. And so we still see today, all this time later, the way that miners, migrant workers are still being exploited by a system that is there to benefit the elite.
Thank you so much for that. I mean, we also have, obviously your works have very strong anthropological sort of commentary and intention. And, within Ireland, I'm definitely looking forward to picking up some of your other works. Within Ireland, which is locally published by independent press, Caravan Press. I know that a lot of congratulations are in order for multiple reasons, both to you and to each of your publishers. And it's such a privilege to hold a copy. I want to also make comment on not just in the pacing, but the way in which the book was typeset. And I want to tell you why. You know, in terms of your 4 days, your chapters are in terms of your 4 days, but also the reflections, moving from different scenes that start on a new page. And I really like how that works because it allows the reader also to move almost reflectively in diary form, almost as Samuel makes his way between past and present during the course of those days, and between actual scenes that happen and his reflections. So I really want to comment on that. I found that a very nice way of pacing, both just in the writing style and in the way that the book was designed and presented. And then a comment on the title, An Island. From the taking from, it reminds me of when you say no man is an island, and this idea that we really are interacting and influenced of and by each other, even if we're isolated. So many of us live in our heads, and so in some ways are isolated anyway. But it's impossible not to sort of be particles bumping up against each other for various reasons, even if it's for a matter of resource allocation or survival, so to speak. Was this always the title? Was it the working title from the beginning? Did it develop over time?
No, I had a dreadful title for. I'm awful, awful, awful at getting titles for my books. So I'd had a title which was taken from a poem, and I can't even remember who the poem was by or what the name of the poem was, but the title was Harbor's Breast, and I think it was supposed to be about feeling safe, and the island being this harbor of safety. And my publisher said to me, this title is just too awful, let's change it. And I said, well, I can't think of anything because I hate titles, I hate them. And then he gave me a few options that he had thought of, and so he can take credit for saying for An Island. I'm afraid it wasn't my idea.
Well, it's a wonderful, title, obviously, because it captures the book so succinctly.
Yes,
And
it
at the
does.
same time, I think books tend to name themselves eventually, almost like a birthing process. So it's wonderfully inspired in that way as well. What can we look forward to in the future? And also, where can readers purchase An Island in South Africa, especially?
Right. Firstly, in South Africa, An Island, it should be available in most of the exclusive books and Wordsworth and, for example, the Book Lounge in Cape Town. I know that what seems to be happening is that there's quite a demand for the book, and the bookshops, they will ask the distributor to bring, say, 5 copies, and then the 5 copies get sold out almost immediately, and then people start panicking. Please don't panic, anybody. There are plenty of books available. Either ask your bookshop to order or keep aside a copy for you, or you can contact Caravan Press. I don't know the email address off by heart, but if you go to the website of Caravan Press, Karina, who is the publisher, will be able to help you out. And then your other question, which was, what can you look forward to? I do have a novel that is busy being shown around by my agent to some people, but I'm not in any rush for that to be published at all. I think I have enough on my plate as it is right now. So, and I don't think that people need to be bombarded with books by the same author. I think there's time for a breathing space for everyone. So we'll see what happens with that. As I said, I'm not in a rush.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for your time, for chatting to us about this beautiful book. I hope that many people are going to be collecting, picking up copies, getting them online as ebooks, and reading this book and others of yours as well. And we look forward to what comes from your pen in the future. We'll wait patiently to see what comes up in the future as well. So congratulations once again.
Thank
And
you.
thanks so much for your time online this evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate it.
And so there you have it, Karen Jennings with her Booker Longlisted and Island. And I hope that many of you will be reading this novel. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's entertaining, it's political commentary, it's extremely relevant, even though it's fiction, or maybe perhaps because it is. And until the next session of Book Bites, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.